The shocking truth behind the Laurie Show murder case, deadly women true crime story. Hook. What if everything you thought you knew about your life was a lie? Laurie thought she was just an ordinary woman until a deadly secret pulled her into a world of darkness. In this chilling tale, she discovers her true fate, and it's more terrifying than she ever imagined. Will she escape the clutches of the shadows, or is she destined to become part of something far worse? Stay tuned. This story will shock you to the core. The night was thick with fog. Darkness pressed against the windows. In the distance, a lone street lamp flickered. A low hum echoed in the empty street. Inside, Laurie sat at her kitchen table, staring at the phone. Her fingers twitched. The screen showed a number she didn't recognize. Her pulse quickened. The room felt colder than usual. The clock on the wall ticked loud. It was late, much later than she remembered. Her eyes darted to the front door. Was someone watching? No, she told herself. The call was just a wrong number. But why had it been so urgent, so desperate? Her thumb hovered over the dial button, but she hesitated. The phone rang again, breaking the silence. Laurie froze. She stared at the screen. A chill crawled up her spine. The voice on the other end was breathless. "It's me," the voice whispered. Laurie's heart skipped. "Who is this?" she whispered back, her voice trembling. "It's me, Laurie. You know me." Her stomach turned. A long pause filled the space between them. A muffled noise came from the other end. It sounded like footsteps. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. A cold draft blew through the room, unsettling her. "I'm outside," the voice said, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Laurie's breath caught in her throat. Her gaze snapped to the window. Nothing. Just the emptiness of the street. The fog swallowed everything. She felt a knot twist in her gut. She could barely breathe. Another sound. A knock at the door. A sharp, deliberate knock. Laurie stood frozen, paralyzed by fear. She didn't move, not an inch. Her mind raced. Who was out there? Was it a prank? She wanted to run, to hide, but something held her in place. The knocking came again, louder this time. The door rattled on its hinges. Laurie's legs felt weak. She stepped slowly, cautiously, toward the door. Each step was agonizing. What if it wasn't just a joke? Her hand gripped the door handle. The cold metal bit into her palm. Her breath caught in her throat as she slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open, but no one was there. Only the empty, foggy street. Laurie's chest tightened. Something wasn't right. She glanced around, scanning for any sign of movement. Nothing. Then she saw it. A shadow, lingering just outside the edge of the porch. Her breath hitched. She was not alone. The shadow shifted, barely noticeable. But it was there, just on the edge of her vision. Laurie's hand tightened around the doorframe, as if holding onto something solid. The street was quiet. The fog swirled like smoke, thick and suffocating. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She stepped outside, slowly. The air was damp, cold, like it had been waiting for her. The world felt eerily still. No cars, no sounds, just the silence of an empty street. She moved cautiously, her eyes never leaving the shadow. It was too still, too quiet. A part of her screamed to turn and run back inside, but her feet kept moving, closer, and then a voice, barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence. "Laurie." Her heart raced. She froze. The voice was familiar, but not in a comforting way. She couldn't place it. It was too distant, too haunting. She turned around quickly, her eyes scanning the darkness. Nothing. The street was empty again. Her breath came out in sharp gasps. Something was wrong. So wrong. Another sound. A crunching step on gravel. She whipped around, but still nothing. Her heart was hammering in her chest. The fog felt thicker, swallowing her whole. And then the figure appeared, not far, but close enough to send her into a panic. A woman, dressed in dark clothing, her face hidden by the shadows. Laurie's throat went dry. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The woman stepped forward, slowly, closer, her steps silent on the wet ground. Laurie's stomach churned. The fog seemed to stretch around them, closing in. The woman's lips curled into a smile. It was not a friendly smile. It was predatory. Laurie took a step back, and the woman moved, faster this time. Her hand shot out, gripping Laurie's wrist in a vice-like hold. Laurie gasped. The woman leaned in close, her breath cold against Laurie's ear. "You should have stayed inside," she whispered. Laurie's heart froze, and then everything went dark. Laurie's body went limp. Her mind screamed, but her muscles refused to respond. The woman's grip tightened, pulling her further into the fog. Laurie could barely see, could barely think. The world felt like it was closing in on her, suffocating her. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat like a drum. She tried to scream, but no sound came. The woman dragged her, her footsteps the only thing Laurie could hear now. The sound of gravel crunching underfoot. Every step made her feel more detached from reality. She felt like she was being dragged through a nightmare. The fog surrounded them, thick and unrelenting. Laurie's vision blurred, but she could still sense the presence behind her. A shadow ever present, always watching. The air was colder now, biting at her skin. Her breathing was shallow, quick. The woman's voice was a low murmur in the fog. "You were always meant to be a part of this, Laurie." The words made no sense. They didn't belong to the world she knew. The woman stopped. Laurie's body was jerked to a halt. She stumbled, her legs shaky, but she managed to stay upright. They were at a house. It was old, decrepit, with broken windows and peeling paint. A place forgotten by time. The door was ajar, as if waiting. Laurie's stomach twisted. Her instinct screamed for her to run, but the woman's hand held her firmly, like iron. "You're not going anywhere," the woman said, her voice cold, emotionless. Laurie's breath hitched. There was no escape. The woman stepped forward, dragging Laurie inside. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a dark interior. The scent of decay hit her instantly. The air inside was stale, heavy with the weight of years of neglect. The woman's grip didn't loosen. Laurie could hear the faint hum of an old light bulb flickering above her. The only sound was the echo of their footsteps. "Sit," the woman ordered. Laurie's body moved, almost without her consent. She was made to sit in a chair, cold and uncomfortable beneath her. The room was filled with shadows, but one thing caught her eye. A large mirror, cracked down the center, hanging crooked on the wall. Her reflection was distorted, like something was wrong with it. Her heart pounded harder. The woman stood before her now. Laurie tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Her body felt like it was shutting down, fading into the darkness. The woman's eyes gleamed in the dim light. Laurie finally managed to whisper, "What do you want from me?" The woman smiled, her teeth sharp and cruel. "Everything," she said. The word lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Laurie's breath caught in her throat. The woman's smile never wavered. Her cold eyes bore into Laurie, unblinking. "Everything," the woman repeated, her voice a soft hiss. Laurie's heart slammed in her chest. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching like fingers. She couldn't breathe. Her skin prickled with the weight of the woman's gaze. Something about this place, this moment, felt wrong. So wrong. Laurie struggled to rise from the chair, but her limbs were like stone, frozen. The woman stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. "Don't try to run," she whispered. Laurie's head spun. The air was thick with tension. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out all other sound. The woman's fingers traced the edge of the chair, slow and deliberate. Each movement felt like a countdown. Laurie's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. The door was too far away, the window too small. There was no way out. "You're mine now," the woman said softly, almost lovingly. Laurie's stomach twisted. A sickening realization crept in. The woman wasn't just here to frighten her. She was here to take her. Laurie's breath came in ragged gasps. Every instinct told her to fight, to scream, but her voice was caught in her throat. The woman's hand reached up, brushing a strand of hair from Laurie's face. Her touch was icy. "You've always been a part of this," the woman continued, her voice low, almost coaxing. "You just didn't know it yet." Laurie's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Who was this woman? Why her? The woman stepped back, her eyes never leaving Laurie. "I'll make you see, Laurie," she whispered. "I'll make you understand." Laurie's pulse raced faster. A noise came from somewhere deep within the house. A creak, followed by another step. She wasn't alone. The woman turned, as if expecting the sound. Laurie's eyes widened. A figure stepped out from the shadows. A man. His face was obscured by the dim light, but there's something familiar about him. Her stomach dropped. She knew him, but how? The man stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Laurie's heart froze, his eyes locked with hers. And then, in a voice as cold as the woman's, he said, "It's time." Laurie's mind raced. The walls seemed to close in on her. Her body trembled uncontrollably. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. The man's cold stare was unbearable. He took another step toward her, and the woman smiled, as if everything had just fallen into place. The room felt smaller now, suffocating. Laurie's breath was shallow, ragged. The man and woman circled her, like predators closing in on their prey. Her hands gripped the cold arms of the chair, knuckles white. Her mind raced, but everything was a blur. The man's eyes never left her face, as if he could see straight through her. "You don't have to be afraid," the woman said, her voice soft but chilling. "We'll show you the truth." Laurie's stomach churned. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body betrayed her. Every part of her screamed to fight, but she couldn't move. The man finally spoke. His voice was low, almost soothing. "Laurie, you've been a part of this for longer than you know. You just don't remember." Laurie's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" she managed to whisper. Her voice sounded foreign, distant. The woman's smile grew wider. "You've been chosen." The words hit Laurie like a cold slap. Chosen? For what? She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. The woman's gaze was magnetic, drawing her in. "You're going to be a part of something much bigger, Laurie," the woman said. "You always have been." Laurie's mind spun faster, her pulse quickening. Her heart thudded in her ears. She tried to push against the fog clouding her thoughts, but it was like wading through concrete. The man reached into his pocket, pulling out something small and shiny. A key. Laurie's eyes flicked to the key in his hand, but she couldn't quite grasp its significance. The woman stepped forward, leaning in close. Her voice was a whisper in Laurie's ear. "Remember what you've forgotten." Laurie's body trembled. The world felt like it was slipping away, like she was losing control of everything. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The woman was still watching her, waiting. For what? Laurie could feel the pressure building in her chest, suffocating her. The man stood silent, watching, as if nothing could hurry the moment. The key dangled between them, a symbol of something Laurie couldn't yet understand. The woman's fingers brushed the back of Laurie's neck. The touch was soft, but it sent a wave of ice through her body. The cold seeped into her skin, spreading down her spine. She gasped, but the air felt thick, impossible to breathe. The woman's voice was a murmur now, distant but clear. "You'll see soon enough, Laurie. You'll remember." And as Laurie tried to fight the grip of the dark fog closing in, the man moved closer, and the key glinted in the dim light. Her world went black. The darkness swallowed her whole. No light, no sound, just a void. Laurie's mind was foggy, distant. Her body felt weightless, suspended in the nothingness. A vague pressure pressed against her chest, tightening with each passing moment. And then a flicker, a flash of light. Her eyes snapped open. But she wasn't in the room anymore. The cold, suffocating darkness had given way to a blinding, sterile light. She blinked, disoriented. The room was different. White walls, cold floors, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A hospital room? She tried to move, but her body was restrained. Her wrists, her ankles. Something was wrong. Her breath quickened. She strained against the restraints, panic rising in her chest. A door creaked open. Footsteps approached. Laurie's head snapped to the side. The man and woman from before. But they weren't alone. There were others, figures in white lab coats, faces hidden behind masks. They were all watching her, waiting. The woman stepped forward, her cold eyes locking onto Laurie's. "You're awake," she said, her voice now sharp, clinical. "Good." Laurie's heart pounded. Her throat was dry, her mouth parched. "What is this? Where am I?" she managed to rasp. The man moved closer, his hands clasped behind his back. "You don't remember?" he asked, his tone almost condescending. "You're in the place you were always meant to be, the place where you've always belonged." Laurie's mind was a whirlwind. She couldn't remember. Nothing made sense. Who were these people? Why was she here? The woman leaned down, her eyes cold but oddly compassionate. "You've been chosen for something extraordinary, Laurie. A purpose far beyond what you understand right now." Laurie's pulse hammered in her ears. Her thoughts were clouded, fragmented. Something deep within her stirred. A feeling of recognition, of déjà vu. "What purpose?" she whispered. "What do you want from me?" The woman's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't kind. "We're going to help you remember, Laurie," she said. "And when you do, you'll understand everything. All of it." Laurie's body went cold. A memory flickered, then faded. A vision of dark shadows, whispers, and keys. She couldn't quite piece it together. The man's voice broke through her haze. "It's time," he said, his eyes gleaming. "Time for what?" Laurie's heart skipped. The restraints, the cold, clinical room. She felt trapped. There was no escape. A sharp prick in her arm. She gasped. The world tilted. Her vision blurred. She tried to fight it, but it was too late. The darkness closed in again, suffocating, pulling her down. This time, there was no light to return to. Only shadows, only silence, and the sound of distant whispers. Soon, the woman's voice echoed in the void. "Soon, you'll remember everything, Laurie." The darkness was thick, suffocating. Laurie's mind swirled in a haze, as if she were drowning in it. No thoughts, no clarity, just shadows and whispers. Her body felt weightless, as if floating in nothing. She couldn't tell how much time had passed, but then something shifted. A sharp light pierced the void, stinging her eyes. Her vision cleared, slowly at first. The room around her began to take shape. She was lying on a cold, metal table, her hands and feet still bound. The air was sharp with chemicals, sterile and harsh. She tried to move, but her body was sluggish. The faint hum of machines filled the room, but everything else was eerily quiet. The woman and man were gone, replaced by another figure in a white coat. A doctor, perhaps. The figure stood in the corner, watching her. Laurie's heart raced. Her mouth was dry like cotton. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak. "Where am I?" she croaked. The doctor stepped forward, a mask covering his face, but his eyes glinted with something unreadable. "Welcome back," he said, his voice calm but chilling. "You've been gone for a while." Laurie's chest tightened. Gone. What did he mean by that? She tried to sit up, but her muscles felt heavy, sluggish. The doctor's eyes lingered on her for a moment before he turned to a nearby table, picking up a syringe. Laurie's pulse quickened. "No, no more," she whispered, panicked. "What's happening to me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to her side, the needle gleaming in his hand. "We're just helping you remember," he said softly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Laurie's breath caught in her throat. What did he mean by remember? Before she could react, the doctor's cold hand gripped her arm. He was too strong. The needle plunged into her skin. Laurie's world tilted. Her mind buzzed, spinning faster, as if her thoughts were being twisted, unraveled. A sharp, burning sensation spread through her veins. Her vision blurred again, and everything around her grew distant. But then a sudden flash. Images, familiar faces, the woman, the man, the shadowy figures, keys, dark doors, a whispered promise. "You were always meant to be here." Her heart stopped for a second as the memory jolted back. She remembered. Fragments, sharp as glass, cutting through the fog. Her life before. Before the fog, before the confusion, before the fear. But it wasn't enough. Her head throbbed with the effort to hold on to the images. The doctor's voice cut through the haze, though it felt distant, like an echo. "Don't worry. You'll remember it all soon." Laurie's breath hitched. She could feel the truth pressing against her, just out of reach. Everything was beginning to fall into place, but she still couldn't see the full picture. The woman's cold smile, the man's unsettling words. Everything was tied together. The key, the door, and the promise. She had been chosen. The pieces were almost there. Almost. But then, another voice. This one wasn't the doctor's. It was the woman's. "You're not alone, Laurie," she said, her voice clear through the haze. Laurie's blood ran cold. The doctor stepped back, his face unreadable. And just before the darkness took her once more, Laurie heard a final whisper. "You will never escape." And everything went black again. The darkness swallowed her once more. But this time it was different. Laurie felt a strange pull, like something was dragging her deeper into the abyss. Her body was weightless, floating in the cold emptiness. Her mind screamed, but no sound came. She tried to open her eyes, but they were glued shut. The air was thick, stagnant, as if time itself had stopped. Then a light, flickering, weak at first, began to grow. Her eyes slowly adjusted, and she saw it. The room was no longer cold and sterile. It was familiar. It looked like the house she had once lived in years ago. The same old, worn furniture, the same wallpaper peeling in the corners. But something was wrong. The colors were off, twisted. The air was thick with the stench of decay. A faint humming noise filled the room, like the buzzing of old electronics, but louder, suffocating. Laurie's heart began to race. The silence felt alive, pressing in on her from every angle. She blinked, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The room seemed to distort before her eyes, the walls closing in and then stretching back out. Her head swam with dizziness, and then she saw it. A figure, a shadow, standing in the doorway. The woman. Her silhouette was sharp, defined against the dim light. Laurie's breath hitched in her chest. "What do you want from me?" Laurie gasped, her voice hoarse. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped into the room, her footsteps slow, deliberate. Laurie could feel her presence before she even spoke. "You're beginning to understand, aren't you?" the woman said, her voice soft, almost coaxing. Laurie shook her head, trying to clear the fog in her mind. I don't understand what's happening. The woman's lips curled into a smile that sent a chill crawling up Laurie's spine. You've been part of this from the very beginning, Laurie. You've always been meant for this. Laurie's chest tightened. The words felt like daggers, each one twisting deeper. Her body trembled. No, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. I don't want this. I don't. The woman stepped closer, her presence filling the room. You can't escape, she said, her tone almost kind, but laced with something darker. You've always been ours. You just didn't remember. Laurie recoiled, the weight of her words sinking in. You lied to me, Laurie choked out. The woman's eyes narrowed, and the room seemed to pulse with a low, ominous hum. I didn't lie, she said, her voice cool. I only showed you what you were too afraid to see. Laurie's mind scrambled, trying to piece everything together. The hospital room, the syringes, the memories, the whispers, the keys. They had been preparing her for this. They had been pulling her into this world, this nightmare, for so long. Laurie's eyes flicked around the room. Siki the door was behind the woman, but she was trapped. No way out. You won't get away, the woman whispered again, as if reading Laurie's thoughts. Laurie's pulse raced. The woman stepped forward, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. Soon, you'll see the truth, she said, her voice silky. Everything you've forgotten will return, and you will be a part of something much, much greater. Laurie's vision blurred as her head spun. The weight of her words pushed down on her chest, suffocating her. No, Laurie whispered, her voice breaking. I won't let you. The woman's smile widened, revealing sharp teeth. It's already done, and with that, Laurie felt her body go numb once more. Her consciousness began to slip, the edges of her vision darkening. She couldn't fight it anymore. The truth was closing in, and Laurie knew, deep down, that there was no escaping it. The last thing she heard was the woman's voice, fading into the darkness. You were always meant to be here, Laurie. The darkness surrounded her once again, but this time it felt different, heavy, cold. Laurie's mind was fragmented, pieces of memories drifting just beyond her reach. But in the abyss, there was a flicker, a whisper. Laurie. Her name echoed through the blackness. Familiar, distant. Her body stirred, but it was sluggish, like waking from a deep, dark sleep. She opened her eyes, blinking into the black void. It wasn't a room anymore. She wasn't in the house. The ground beneath her feet was soft, damp, and cold. Her breath hitched. The air smelled of earth, of decay. She looked around, her vision clearing slowly. The shadows pressed in from all sides, swallowing everything in their path. A forest. A dark, dense forest. The trees were tall, their twisted branches clawing at the night sky. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, casting the forest into an eerie, inky darkness. Laurie's chest tightened, her heartbeat quickened, a low thudding in her ears. How did she get here? The last thing she remembered, her body still felt numb, was the woman's cold smile. She stood, her legs shaky, as if the earth beneath her was shifting with each step. The whisper again, Laurie. Her breath caught. It wasn't just in her head. It was real. The voice was closer now, almost at her ear. She whipped around. Nothing. A shiver crawled up her spine. Something was watching her. The woods were silent. Too silent. Laurie's pulse raced as she began to move, each step tentative, unsure of where she was going. An escape. Her feet crunched softly against the forest floor, leaves and twigs breaking underfoot. Then a flicker of movement, a figure. In the distance, she froze. It was just a shadow, a blur in the darkness, but it was there. The whisper came again, clearer now. "Come closer, Laurie." The voice was unmistakable. The woman. Laurie's stomach dropped. The figure moved again, closer, but still out of reach. And then, through the dark trees, she saw it, a faint light, like a distant fire. A house. The same house. The one she had seen in her memories. Her heart pounded as she moved toward it. The closer she got, the clearer the light became. But it wasn't just a house. It was a ruin, faded and crumbling, like a forgotten relic. The door was ajar. Her breath hitched, and her mind screamed at her to turn away. But she couldn't. Something was pulling her in. She stepped forward, each movement slow, as if the air itself was holding her back. The door creaked open. She stepped inside, the light flickering above her. The room was empty, save for dust and the faint smell of mildew. The walls were lined with mirrors, cracked and shattered. In each reflection, Laurie saw herself, distorted, warped, a version of herself she didn't recognize. She stumbled back, her breath coming in shallow gasps. A voice echoed through the room. "Do you see it now?" Laurie's body went cold. It wasn't the woman's voice this time. It was someone else. Her mind reeled. The air in the room seemed to warp, the walls closing in as if the house itself was alive, breathing with her. Her reflection in the shattered mirrors twisted into something unrecognizable. A face. Her face. But no, it was a mask. A twisted, smiling mask. She backed away, but the mirrors multiplied, reflecting her from every angle. The mask grinned wider in each reflection. The room spun. Laurie's legs gave way beneath her, and she fell to the floor, her vision blurring. From the shadows, the woman stepped forward, her cold gaze fixed on Laurie. "You can't run anymore," she said, her voice low and final. "You've always been one of us." Laurie's heart skipped a beat as she struggled to breathe. "No," she gasped. "I'm not like you." The woman knelt before her, a twisted smile on her lips. "Everything you've ever known was a lie," she whispered. "You're ours, Laurie. You always have been." Laurie tried to push away, but the air was thick, as if the very house was holding her down. The woman's hand reached out, and as her fingers brushed against Laurie's cheek, the world seemed to shift. The mirrors, the forest, the house, all of it blurred. Laurie was no longer in control. Her reflection in the shattered glass smiled back at her, not her own, but someone else's, and it was grinning, twisting, reaching for her, with no escape. The truth was closing in, and Laurie knew, deep down, there was no turning back now that Laurie's vision went dark. The air grew heavier, and her body felt like lead, sinking deeper into the shadows that surrounded her. The woman's smile stretched wider as the room seemed to collapse around Laurie, her own reflection mocking her every movement. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her chest felt tight, as though the walls themselves were pressing in on her, suffocating her. The house, the mirrors, everything was closing in, warping, bending, like it was alive. The woman leaned closer, her voice soft, almost affectionate. "You're finally beginning to understand, Laurie. It's all been part of the plan. You never had a choice." Laurie's heart raced, but she couldn't find the strength to move. Her body was frozen, her limbs numb. The air in the room was thick with something ancient, something evil. The walls whispered with voices, too faint to understand, but Laurie could feel them creeping into her mind. "No," Laurie gasped, though the words barely left her lips. "No, I'm not like you." The woman's laugh echoed, sharp and chilling. "You are. You've always been. You just didn't want to see it. But now you have no choice." Laurie's eyes darted to the shattered mirrors, each one reflecting her, her body contorting unnaturally, her face twisting into something alien. She saw herself from angles she never knew existed, each reflection more distorted than the last. The mask she'd seen earlier, her own face but wrong, stared back at her, smiling, its eyes hollow. Suddenly, the woman stepped back, her eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. Laurie's mind was swirling, the truth clawing its way to the surface. She was part of this, part of something far darker than she could comprehend. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony in her head. The memories, her past, began to unravel, each piece falling into place like a twisted puzzle. She had been chosen, had always been chosen, for something unspeakable. The woman extended a hand, her fingers curling toward Laurie. "You are one of us now, Laurie. There is no escape." Laurie's breath caught in her throat as the shadows closed in, her reflection, her true reflection, reaching for her. And then everything went silent. The last thing Laurie heard was the sound of the door closing behind her. And then there was nothing but the darkness. And the whispering, the darkness clung to Laurie like a second skin, her senses dulled, her mind drifting in and out of consciousness. The woman's words echoed in her head, repeating over and over, like an endless mantra. "You are one of us now." Laurie couldn't escape them. She couldn't escape the truth that had now seeped into her very bones. But then something shifted. It was subtle at first, like a small crack in the foundation of everything she had believed. The suffocating silence around her began to waver, and the dark, twisting images in the mirrors started to fade. For a moment, Laurie's mind cleared. Her breath, once shallow and frantic, slowed. The woman and the shadows, everything, seemed distant, blurry. Laurie's hands trembled as she pushed herself up from the cold floor. The weight in her chest wasn't as heavy now, but there was a deep ache in her soul, a fracture she couldn't heal. The room, too, was changing. The once oppressive atmosphere, the broken mirrors, and the twisted reflections all began to blur into something else, something lighter. The crumbling walls seemed to breathe with a slow, rhythmic pulse. Laurie took a cautious step forward, and then another. She wasn't sure where she was going, only that she needed to move, needed to leave this place behind. But the woman's voice was still there, like a shadow lurking in the corners of her mind. "You can't outrun your fate, Laurie," the voice whispered, distant yet near. Laurie stopped. Her chest tightened again, but this time, she didn't feel trapped. She understood something now, something essential. She had always been a part of this dark world, but that didn't mean she was bound to it forever. She wasn't helpless. Her eyes lifted to the dim light breaking through the cracks in the walls. She wasn't alone. The room was quiet now, save for the faint hum of something ancient stirring in the distance. Laurie looked around one final time, feeling the last of the shadows slip away, and with a deep breath, she stepped through the threshold, leaving the house, leaving the woman, and leaving everything she had ever known behind. The path ahead was uncertain, but Laurie had found something far more valuable than answers. She had found her will to walk away from the darkness. And with that, she stepped into the light, no longer running, but free.